Hey, what's up, everyone? It is time for another episode in our Fear, Love, and Creativity interview series. And today we feature an interview with the great Larry Levine. He's author of the wonderful book, Selling from the Heart. You can learn more about him at sellingfromtheheart.net. And today we're going to talk about sales. And by the way, whether you like it or not, everyone is in sales. If you're in business, you're in sales. And when a lot of people think about sales, when a lot of people manage other people when it comes to sales, they use fear to try to motivate. You think of that Alec Baldwin character in Glenn Ross, Coffees for Closers. A lot of people think sales is just about hustle and grind and have your 16 cups of coffee. Get pumped up and go and sell and force people into that funnel. Well, guess what? When you sell from a place of fear, you're dumber. You're not as effective. You're in fight, flight, or freeze. It's not healthy to you. It's not healthy to your business. It's not healthy to your sales efforts. So today, Larry and I discuss how to sell from the heart, just like his book says. Now, this isn't about fluff. This isn't about BS. If you watch and listen to Larry, you know he's not a fluffy character. He's got 27 years, successful years in selling office technology. And he talks about true authenticity in sales. This isn't some woo-woo BS stuff, but it's about how to slow down, focus on your process, sell from the heart, focus on the end user, focus on your client, pull them toward you, attract them toward you, instead of just selling by getting pumped up, being fearful and being driven by a fear that you're not going to hit your quota. Larry and I talk about all that and more in today's interview. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Larry Levine. All right, Larry. So I had to hit the record button because you and I could go on forever without hitting the record button, have a wonderful discussion. I've done that before with people, and I'm like, wait, I'm not even recording. We should have recorded this whole damn thing. So, Larry, thank you for being here. And it's this series is we're talking about big things, right? Like maybe how the world behaved in certain circumstances over the last year and a half of COVID, or even things in history like the Japanese internment, the Holocaust, fear-based things where people are scared of them and they operate out of fear. But we talked to Aaron Urban, who you and I know, about making career decisions. And, for those entrepreneurs out there who have to sell for their business, or people who work for a corporation and have to sell, I think that either fear or love can help guide us in that state. And really, Larry, the basis of this is that our greatest power as human beings is our creative flow. And when you think creatively and when you have come up with creative decisions for your clients, for your business, for the people around you, when you're in a state of fear, you're in fight, flight, or freeze, and you're literally dumber. You're not thinking creatively. But when you're in a state of love and Larry, you wrote the book, Selling from the Heart. It's not woo-woo like love. Hey, I'm going to give you kissy, 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 right? There's a different way you look at that. So it's like, I got to talk to Larry about this, because selling from a state of fear, we see people sell a lot of books, right? And a lot of programs almost based on fear. Get scared, get your adrenaline, have your 16 cups of coffee, coffees for closers, go out there and hit. But there's another way. And so, Larry, I'd love to talk to you about that today. And I appreciate you being here.
No, it's so good to see you. Yeah, we could go on and talk forever. And by the way, I've had massive amounts of conversations and I've forgotten to hit record. So I'm glad you hit record, Curt.
I do that on webinars. I have like you have an inner group, like I have an inner circle group, and I'll start talking. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to record this for the people who watch the replay. So yeah, that record button is always key.
Yeah, but you hit on something. It's so interesting when you talk about fear and you talk about love in the same thing, and then you throw in the word sales. How does all of this mesh? But I just have to preface this, and you know it, but just for your listeners, I have no PhD in psychology, human behavior, anything like that when it comes to this. I always say I got a PhD from getting the crap kicked out of me for decades in sales. But what really drove me, we were talking about it prior to us hopping on this call together, is fear drove me. And it wasn't, the fear-based things that you see out in society, and it wasn't the fear that the news, promotes and so forth. It was the internal fear that I was self-induced by myself. And what's really interesting about it is I think quite often in sales, we're stack ranked. we are stacked ranked to death in sales. Where do we sit on the leaderboard?
Yeah.
And the fear that drove me was fear of not being accepted, right, on sales teams, the fear of not being accepted in the company I was working for, the fear of finishing middle or bottom of the pack. So those are the things that drove me in sales. So rather than succumb to fear, I let fear drive me, but in a way that drove who I was internally to say there has to be a better way. Because you and I, we've known each other for quite some time, so we've had some deep conversations. I wasn't trained in a way that I thought was conducive to sales. I was trained very old school, right? All about the company, all about the product, all about me, which quite frankly, a lot of that still exists today. But when I took love and I threw love into the equation and the fear that drove me, I started to see great things starting to happen because it was counterintuitive to what everybody else in sales was doing, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, last year, it's probably March, April. It's right when Mark Hunter, who you and I both love, know and love, when he came out with the Mind for Sales, which was funny because I remember us kidding, like, did you write this knowing COVID was going to happen? Like, it was made for that period. And we talked about it, and I said, what do you say to people who are like, oh, I can't sell during COVID? Like, I just have to stop selling. And he had just such a wonderful quote, and I use it, and I've used it on webinars before, and I give him credit. I quote Mark Hunter, which is, if you have the ability to help someone, and at its heart, sales is about helping someone, whether you sell golf balls or high-end consulting or whatever, somewhere in between, right? You sold office technology. If you have the responsibility to help someone, or if you can help someone, you have the responsibility to reach out and do that. And that's so counterintuitive. And that's what your whole book is about. It's about, like, sales is about helping people. Like you said, you were trained, and in your book, you actually kind of say, like, well into your career, you actually had to train yourself or retrain yourself. But when it's about me, and my product, you're not helping people. You're not focused on helping people, right?
No, and I'm going to hit something head on only because I just know you, and we're going to have a great conversation around this. Here's where I want to go when we start talking about help. And I agree, because I remember, I think it was one of the very first podcasts I did into my journey that I'm on now, is somebody had asked me, hey, Larry, clearly define, but you have one sentence, right? Not a big drawn off 5 minutes or anything like that, but in one clear sentence, define sales. And I said, it's about the art of the help, right? You even bring it up. Mark Hunter's all about, helping in sales. But here's the thing, and here's where I want us to maybe go with this for a little bit, is if you can't help yourself, how can you help your clients do better business? If you're not willing to help yourself become better, then let's stop and think about this for a moment. How can you help your clients into doing better business? And I don't say that to cast a dark shadow, disrespect anybody or things like that, but let's think about that for a moment. If sales is the art of the help, and helping somebody and helping an organization to become better, then let's look inside who we are and help ourselves become better. That means let's get in tune with who we are, right? Whether that be through self-love or self-leadership or self-awareness or self-reflection. But maybe we can spin this off in a little bit for one simple reason is, a lot of the guests that we're getting now to start to come on the podcast at Selling from the Heart are all talking about this inner help, this inner voice, right? That we either self-impose on ourselves or that we use to fuel that, that fear flight. What do you call that? That
fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
It's a stress hormone. It's cortisol. And as part of that self-help or self-care, right? And it's funny, you bring this up sometimes in workshops or trainings. I have a slide that says self-care is self-blank, and people selfish. Oh, and they're like, oh, we're conditioned to think self-care is selfish. Anything about yourself is, it's that individualism that's sending the country down. And if you don't invest in yourself, right? I mean, one of the biggest killers, like speaking apart from sales, just speaking in terms of us, right? Human beings. One of the biggest killers, perhaps the biggest killer health-wise, is inflammation. right? Inflammation can lead to cancers, can lead to colds. Inflammation with COVID, horrible, right? When you are in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze, which is your cortisol, like cortisol is great if a tiger jumps out in front of you, right? Like I got to run. Or you're in a dark alley and someone jumps out and is going to rob you, right? Then it's great. You're going to kick ass or you're going to run, or unfortunately, maybe you just curl in the fetal position. That's great. It's a survival instinct. But when you're like that all the time, that cortisol causes a host of health problems, including inflammation, derived from stress, anxiety. And I kind of half joke with people, like, you're no good to your family, your friends, you're no good to yourself, you're no good to your clients if you're dead. And so if you don't invest in yourself to learn how to deal with those things physically, mentally, spiritually, like, how are you possibly going to help other people? There's no way you're going to be at 100% to do that and serve them if you don't invest in yourself.
No, and it's so interesting, because if you just use what we're speaking about, just the last couple minutes of this applies so heavily in the sales world. Because the pressure of performing in the month, the pressure of hitting quarter numbers, the pressure of hitting semi-annual numbers, and then the pressure of hitting your numbers on an annual basis. And the reason why I had put Selling from the Heart together the way I did is I look back on, almost 3 full decades in the Office Technology Channel. And there wasn't one time, one organization, one manager, and I use manager because I didn't really have leaders. There's a big difference between leaders and managers, that they even said, hey, Larry, right? We'll specifically say, hey, Larry, I'm here to help you become the best version of yourself. Hey, team, over the next 30, 60, and 90 days, we're going to take a quarter journey into working on our inner selves. And the reason why we're doing this is so you all can help sell better. Big, massive disconnect. Now let's take a look at what we've gone through together as a society the last, 14 to 16 months as we push through the pandemic. This plays out even more so now than ever before. This is the time where if you can't go on the journey to really discover who you are, it'll always prevent you from becoming the best version of who you can become in your career, fill in the blank with whatever your career is. But I always say sales is a full contact sport. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to get the snot kicked out of you because you're going to get told no a whole lot more than you're going to get told yes. And this is where working on ourselves and our routines and rhythms and rituals becomes so important. I remember it was just not too long ago, I'm working with a sales team. We're doing a deep team read into Selling from the Heart. And I love when I get questions like this, because we're a third into the book and someone had asked Curt, how does all this inner work play out with helping me become a better sales professional? But and there was a long drawn out answer, but for the purpose of our time together, we do preventative, routine things on our car, maybe our house, our appliances, things like that. When's the last time anybody's done some preventative maintenance on themselves?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. No, it's true. And, our society is geared at sick care, right? In many places, we have a society that incentivizes sick care instead of well care. And there's some statistics that the biggest amount of people who are quitting are doctors because they're sick of it. They can't truly help people because people only come when they're sick. Now, that applies to health, but it also applies to them investing in themselves. Only when I have a problem am I going to go invest in myself. Well, at that point, you might be deep in the hole. You might be deep in the well. Wouldn't you have rather invested in yourself along the way? And one thing you mentioned before we got on here is, and this goes in line with what you just said about the no's. I've had some clients who they get one no and they crumble. And I get it. I understand if you hadn't had rejection. If you aren't physically there and spiritually there to be able to take a punch like that, that's going to affect your sales. And then you're going to be desperate. And then you're going to get what you call commission breath. And then your content is going to sound desperate and all that. But one thing you mentioned, and it's so powerful because I have a business trifecta boot camp, which is branding, marketing, but mindset. And it's not like a rah mindset, get pumped up mindset. Because I like to say that's why the gyms are full on January 1st and empty by the end of the month. But you mentioned that when you were able to go back to process, and you talked about rituals. And so the mindset that I teach is a process-oriented mindset. Like when I get up in the morning, if I have 18 choices and 18 paths to go, that leads to anxiety. But if I don't have to think, right? If I can just go to my process, that makes me bulletproof. And I just put one foot in front of the other, and I know I'm going to get some no's. I know I'm going to get some yeses. But over time, if I stick to my process, the chips are going to fall one direction or the other. I'm going to learn and I'm going to optimize. How were you able to build that process-oriented mindset? Because you had mentioned it before we got online that you had operated for so long in that area of fear, but process rituals were able to really turn it around for you.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I'm a big believer that we're products of our environment. Without getting too deep into, we're products of our environment, I think we can go back and say we're products of how we were raised in the environments that we were raised in and things like that. Well, I'm a big believer that salespeople are products of the environment as well, Curt. So if I look back on how I was raised, I was raised by a very highly educated father who was a rocket scientist for the United States government. He was a rocket scientist for the Air Force, and he studied liquid jet propulsion, all this brainiac propeller head stuff. So though I rebelled against it in my earlier years and things like that, my mom was highly relational oriented. But when I look at the process and the practice that we had to do, so we had to do certain things when we came home from school, right? We had to immediately sit down after we got our snack and did the things that you do as kids. Then we had to do our homework. And it was the art of planning to do it. And it was the practice behind doing it and the discipline behind doing our homework. So that if we were stuck, we had to ask for help. But at least we did that. And it was just ingrained in us, right? It was just the daily things that we had to do repeated over time. Well, when I got into sales, right, I chose to get into sales. I wasn't forced to get into sales. I carried that same philosophy with me. So the first year I was in sales, I started seeing people cutting corners, right? And they wing it and all the things that you still see going on in sales today. But I told myself, if I'm going to succeed in this, then I have to hold myself to a higher degree of standards and a higher degree of accountability. And I had to make certain things non-negotiable. And just do them repeatedly day in and day out. Why? Because that's a part of what I had to do in sales. So prospecting became non-negotiable, right? Making calls became non-negotiable. How I took care of my clients became non-negotiable. And I carried that over time. And I just started to fine tune the process, and I started to fine tune the plan. It's no different, right? And I write about it in Selling from the Heart, where I start talking about sales professionals and sales reps. It's no different than, get in tune with a professional athlete or a very successful actor or actress or a successful musician. They all have these certain non-negotiable things that they do on a consistent basis that separates them from everybody else.
Yeah.
But, that's what I brought to the forefront, but it was all predicated on fear. A couple of things. I didn't want to let my parents down in the career that I chose. But that's just a product of how I was raised. And the second thing is I wanted to be noted as a sales professional as opposed to a sales rep because of the perception behind sales. So I was willing to double down on doing the things necessary, the disciplines, the basics, the core foundations, and do them to the best of my ability, but do them consistently and have a no excuse mindset. That's kind of what drove me into sales. It's what drives me today, still to this day.
And it's so interesting because having that process and knowing what you have to do every day, and that's what differentiates just a rep from a professional athlete. And it's what differentiates. I mean, you look at a guy like Tom Brady, right? Love him or hate him. What is he now, 44 years old?
Something like that.
The guy is still going, and they've released his workout schedule, his nutrition schedule. You talk about a guy who is process oriented. Coming out of college, he doesn't have the strongest arm. He's not the most physically talented, physically gifted person. he's got that process and he's got those rituals. He's still going at 44 when a lot of these guys are retired by 28, 29. And there's a lot of people out there who are very talented, not just sports, but sales,
Sure, absolutely.
entrepreneurship. And when you rely on talent alone, right, things can come to you pretty easily, right? You see this in the branding world. Well, I'm great. I can do this. I could do that. And then COVID hits or some sort of challenge hits. And what I find is that talent, all of a sudden, when the shit hits the fan, may not get you where you need to go. But the people who have the process, I mean, so much, it's the people who are really successful, I notice, aren't the most talented people. They can be talented. That doesn't hold them back, certainly. But they're the people who are process oriented and focus on their skills, because those skills are what make you bulletproof versus, whether it's keynote speaking, right? There's some talented keynote speakers who are out of work. And then those people complain. There was a thing, and this is my last, I watched the UFC fight the other night, Conor McGregor versus, there was a whole thing online where apparently a UFC reporter who was doing the red carpet or something had never been a reporter, never went to journalism school, but was a YouTube star. So all these journalism school grads were so mad that they've worked for so hard. They went to journalism school for all this time. They spent all this money, yet she jumps to the front of the line. And I'm like, don't be mad at her. Maybe be mad at yourself for just relying on journalism school, right? I mean, you started off by saying, I don't have a PhD. I don't have that. I mean, some of the best salespeople in the world didn't graduate from college. They focus on skills versus a piece of paper, talent, because when the shit hits the fan, COVID, politics, pandemic, whatever it is, you can, that the skills are going to provide you the armor to adapt and thrive, right?
Yeah, and I want to play off of the skill set because, and I'm not here to discredit skill set. It's a massively huge part of what we have to be coached and trained to.
Yeah.
But I find so often that's all we do. Right. We coach and train salespeople. We coach and train insert career choice in skill set. Well, that's a small portion of it. I'm a big believer it's a triangle, and it's an equal combination of skill set, mindset, and I'm going to throw in heart set just because it sounds good and it's what I firmly believe in, selling from the heart. But when we only coach the skill set and we forget about developing mindset and heart set, and if we look at those as an equal part of a pie, we're missing out on 2/3 of the things that we can really do to excel our careers and to become better versions of ourselves. And you just look at it, right? Again, man, I'm a sports geek, and I know you are as well. I mean, we could geek out on sports all day long and make the analogies, but peel back anybody, insert name of top athlete in whatever the major sport is, and they're going to tell you it's skill set, it's mindset, right? It's how they take care of themselves. We could throw heart set in there just, for the conversation's sake.
Yeah.
What's preventing people from doing that, on their own? Think about that for a second. What's preventing people from investing in themselves? And it's interesting because just recently I had a guest on the Selling from the Heart podcast that was just near and dear to me. It's my very first business coach, the one that I personally invested in for the very first time. And I didn't learn some of these things till my 40s. And now into my 50s, I just go, man, what would it have been like if I would have went down this journey in my 20s? I mean, I can't rewrite how my life's played out. I can learn from it. But, that's just, what would it be like? Imagine, as the listeners listening to this, what would it be like if you can go on that journey where you can combine skill set, heart set, mindset, invest in the journey to become better, help yourself become better? Would that transform your career? Only you can answer that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and those three together really build a winning process. Because there's going to be days you don't feel like working on your skills, and your mindset's going to help you do it. There's going to be days where you wake up, feel like crap, but you have process to work on. And just like you mentioned, the prospecting and and then the heart set kind of gives you the why. Why am I getting up every day to do this? Why do I want to do this? Why do I want to help people doing this?
And you mentioned, yeah, it took a while for you to invest. I had kind of my great awakening at around age 40, where I shut down my 7-figure agency. And, even now I look back and one of the things I'm passionate about is just a holistic view of a person, of a human being, and health, looking at health and looking how do they take care of themselves, health-wise, nutrition-wise. And, this country's killing themselves with sugar and other crap that we just pour down ourselves, right? And it's like, if you don't take care of all of those things, you're not going to be 100% in your career. You're not going to be 100%. But I look back at some of the people I worked with and some of the special interests I worked with when I had my agency. And my first feeling is a feeling of regret working for them. But then I have to stop myself and say, listen, I learned, from that experience, and I'm going to use it from now on to educate people that I know how the sausage is made, and these things. And so looking back, I think, when I was in politics for years, it was like, okay, and I'm sure you see this in sales, right? There'd be these political consultants who only moved to like winning districts, right? Where the political breakdown of voters went in their favor. And so they just amassed a winning record in politics. And so they would get promoted and promoted and promoted and promoted. But then if it came down to it to be a tough election, they get wiped off the map because they were never tested, right? That iron was never sharpened. And I always told people, I don't want to hire the people with the winning record. I want to hire people who have been through wars and learned from the wars. Not just failed, but learned from the wars. And so you hitting on that, one of the, I think, the abilities to get out of that fear-based mindset and a heart-based mindset is to not marinate in the past. Like you and I don't marinate in our past. We look at the past and we're like, shit, yeah, I would have been better if I'd done those years. But you know what? Maybe not, because now it empowers me to help other people to say, hey, I was there. Now I can reach in and I can help you. And that, that's part of gratitude, right? Is looking at that and saying, listen, that wasn't a wasted 10, 15, 20 years. That was a learning 10, 15, 20 years that I'm going to use to help someone else.
Yeah, wow. You touch on some things that are just near and dear to me. And the reason why I always say, through my mess in my 50s became my message. And I look back on, right. And I had what I think a very successful career in office technology sales. But, I was dealt certain things that forced me in entrepreneurship and so forth. But, right, you got to make do with what happens and you make the best of it. But the reason why I love talking to you and the friendship that we've built over the years is we're willing to talk about things and bring things to the surface that many people think about, but don't want to talk about, Curt.
Yeah.
And I say this because I have, I admire you and respect you, and we get into some really deep conversations that, quite frankly, a lot of people don't want to go down. Right. I'm bringing selling from the heart and this message in alignment of values, right? And playing off fear and incorporating love, because I saw how it played off in my career. And I see now, as I start working with salespeople and sales leaders and sales teams, these are the things that get shoved off in the broom closet that nobody wants to talk about, but yet are preventing people from fully becoming the best versions of who they are, so they can turn around and grow business the right way, the healthy way, with values, with morals, with dignity, with sincerity, with substance, as opposed to what's happening now.
Well, and it's become fashionable on LinkedIn to rip on sales and salespeople. And you look at the salespeople who look, as we talked about, as sales as helping, as sales as serving. And it's interesting because some of the more celebrity salespeople are the people who are more like the Alec Baldwin character in Glengarry Glen Ross.
Yeah.
And there's something about that. It's just like the fitness industry, right? The people who attract the money are the people who make the noise, and they show the veins, and they're like, you want to look like this? You got to work harder, right? I see that in sales too. And it's like, I look at at people and some of the videos they're putting out, and it's like, just work harder, sweat harder, no pain, no gain. And it keeps contributing to what you went through in sales, where it's like, maybe how about you realize that prosperity isn't something you go and try to grab from someone else. Prosperity is from within you. If you start getting it in circulation by providing value and impact, it's a better, first of all, it's a better way to live. You're not in that constant stress stage, but it's more effective. But that for whatever reason, there's a large segment, and it's programming, right? It's how we're programmed by our society, and we're in kind of a stress society, go harder, go, and it's like, it sells more books, it sells more YouTube videos. The more outrageous you are, the more you tell people to hustle and grind, the more you tell people to just like, push people through the funnel, overcome those objections, right? Think of the terms people use. It's like brute force sales sells, gets more podcast listens sometimes, or sells some of these professional development things, creates celebrities. But in the end, I think it's also doing people a disservice who buy this crap and then realize, well, I worked hard. I have the blood, sweat, and tears. And now I'm not only less effective as a salesperson, I'm broken down physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Well, think of, I mean, there's a couple of things. I'm never going to sacrifice my integrity. And I'm always going to look at this in the long term as opposed to the short term. Right. So the hustle and grind that you see on social media, insert name of favorite platform you like hanging out on. You see this all day long, but that's only going to last so long, right? It's only going to last so long. There's always going to be a Johnny come lately or a Sally come lately, right? Who's going to pop up, who's going to be a social media darling for a little bit.
Yeah.
You want longevity and you want staying power, then stay true to who you are. Bring authenticity, sincerity, deep substance to the forefront. It's so interesting, right? I look at my whole journey, right? In I'll just call it social, right? I don't even want to call it social media, social selling. My whole journey in social started back like 2009, 2010. And there wasn't a course I took. There wasn't video training I watched. It all stemmed from my very first business coach who taught me, right, how to marry my external behaviors with my internal behaviors and how to walk a professional line through social. Yeah. And do it consistently and do it with discipline. There's no secret sauce and there's no silver bullet to any of this stuff. I would say, you want to stick out amongst all the empty suits and all that. Just act like a professional, engage, educate, excite people into conversations. Be willing to talk about tough things that a lot of people aren't willing to talk about. Yeah. Be respectful. It's the same thing that applies when you're aligning values and you're having conversations with your clients. But, to me, sales, right? Let's go back to fear for a second, but people play on fear, right? And fear sells because look at all the inconsistent things that many people do within their career. No one's really consistent at planning, practice, process, insert whatever P word that aligns with that. So when you bring inconsistencies into this, then what happens is then you're hit at a weak moment, you play off of fear, and then all of a sudden you get sucked down the rabbit hole of spending all this money to for the silver bullet or the quick fix to something when the quick fix is actually sitting inside of you. Does that make sense?
It does. Which leads me to another question, which is, if you're someone who you're listening to this and you're in sales or you're not, well, if you're an entrepreneur, you're in sales, whether you like it or not, right?
By the way, everyone's in sales.
Everyone's in sales. I have 4 kids. I have to sell every day.
Oh yeah.
But let's say you've been inconsistent and you're listening to this and you're realizing, wow, I'm in a hole, right? And you are about to go the path of fear, which is, I just got to dig that. I got to take that shovel and just start jamming dirt around, right? To try and get out of here. Or maybe I'm digging. Maybe I keep digging, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, right, but I'm in a hole and I have to hit my quota. I'm going to lose my job. I got to put food on the table. Larry, what you're saying is great. If times are good, I have time to invest in taking that long-term kind of slower process of developing relationships. But right now, I got to put food on the table and I have 2 weeks to meet quota. What do you say to someone like that who's in that fight, flight, or freeze to try to get them to calm down and realize, well, no, the most effective way to get out of that hole is to slow down, breathe, yield, and look how you can build relationships and how you can provide value.
I mean, I agree with the slow down, but what prevents somebody from doing this in parallel to what they're doing right now? See, I'm and that's what drove me, is marrying short-term, mid-term, and long-term vision and actions together. Not just saying, I'm going to do this for a certain period of time and I'm going to forget about everything else. I knew I had to hit my numbers. I knew I had to hit quarter numbers. I knew, right? There was times I didn't hit quota. There was times I goose egged, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
But what I did is I always look back and go, and I tried to unwind it. What caused me to get to where I was at? And it was usually something that I failed to do, or a breakdown in something that happened months prior. So that's where I just said, you know what, just double down on doing the consistent things day in and day out and make them non-negotiable. So if you're in sales, right, maybe it's you start working on that first hour of every morning and you do that routine every single day and it becomes non-negotiable. And you block and tackle your calendar and you go from, right, for the first hour of every morning, I'm going to prospect. For these hours, those are my golden hours, are client facing, and do them consistently. Yeah. And again, I mean, we don't have time to really get in deep. I mean, we could, but where I'm going with this is when you bring inconsistent behaviors and actions to the forefront, then all of a sudden you're faced with, hey, it's the middle of the month. I haven't sold anything. Well, what led up to that point? At some point, you have to draw the line in the sand and say, what am I willing to change in order to get to where I need to be? But without a plan, without practicing, without a process, I don't see how you're going to consistently succeed at anything.
Well, and when you say consistent process, one of the things you go back to is when you have a consistent process that you do every day. Let's say there's a month where you don't hit your goals. If you have a consistent process, like you said, you can look back to see where the breakdown was because you have data. You have daily data to find out. If you don't have that consistent process and you goose egg, imagine that's when the fear sets in, because to you, sales is just based on luck and hope, right? And it's like, if there's a breakdown, you can look back and see where the breakdown was. Not over 3 days. I always tell people, tell me your process isn't working after you've done it 30 to 60 days. Because then you have a universe of data where you can look back, see where the breakdown, or see what did well and cookie cutter it. But if you don't have that data, and you don't get the data unless you're consistent, that can lead to more fear and that breakdown. Larry, I know our time is short here. So I want to give you the final word in terms of someone listening who needs to, wants to, has to shift from a fear-based sales mentality to a heart-based sales mentality.
I would say, and it goes back to what I learned in my 40s, I wish I would have implemented sooner. So it's taking the time to invest in a coach and a mentor. That's the first thing I'd leave people with, is really hone in on your circle of influence and develop kinship with people who are more experienced than you, that can help you along the way, that have been there, done that. Mm-hmm. And then be willing to really uncover who you are. Be really cognizant, be really willing to open up the cupboard into who you are. I didn't learn this till my 40s. If there's anything that I can impart on anybody, and especially in sales, is if you can connect better to yourself, I firmly believe you will connect better to others. If you're willing to get vulnerable with yourself, it'll be easier to get vulnerable with others. If you're willing to go and invest in yourself, the returns are immense. But if you'll never invest in yourself, you'll never be able to collect on yourself. I wish I would have made the investment in my 20s and 30s. I can't go back and rewire it or rewrite it. But if I would have invested in my 20s on the things that I know today, I don't know what could have happened. Would I be where I'm at? Who knows?
Yeah.
But if there's anything that I can impart on your listeners, Curt, it's be willing to invest in yourself, pay close attention to your inner circle, put yourself into proximity of people who can really help you, and transfer what you're coached and taught and take that out in your career and do that with your clients and out in your marketplace.
Larry, that's a wonderful place to end. And I know you have to go for another call. Larry Levine, author of the wonderful book, Selling from the Heart. Link will be in the show notes. Co-host of the Selling from the Heart podcast. Larry, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Anytime, Curt.